Hello and welcome everyone to History Bytes. I envisage this as a virtual platform to share my thoughts with you on the constitutions of Pakistan and its constitutional history. And I use the word constitutions in the plural quite deliberately because Pakistan has seen, in my calculation, at least five constitutions and then any number of reiterations of the enduring 1973 constitution itself. Now, you might wonder, well, of course, an exercise in history and historiography may be a good thing in its own right, but how does it connect with the current circumstances? And I understand that there must be a lot of fatigue and disconnection with whatever is happening around us for various reasons. We are feeling either apathetic, dissociated, or really just in a downward spiral of cynicism. And I want to take this opportunity actually to perhaps shift the perspective on the conversation on constitutional politics and the prospects for democracy in Pakistan by delving into historical inquiries and also situating Pakistan's example in a broader comparative and global framework. Because we have to realize that we are one of many, many post colonial states that came into or stepped into this exercise of formulating a new constitution for a brand new nation state in the era of decolonization in the late 40s and 50s. And of course, our constitutions of that time did not survive for very long, they were rather short lived. But at the same time, we have very much gained a lot from global constitution making in that era and in the aftermath as well. So, of course, there have been so many constitutional borrowings, um, and much as, of course, Pakistan's example in many ways is distinctive, and any other context would also claim to be distinctive in many ways, I think we are all actually quite globally connected, and there are many convergences also to learn from. Of course, the divergences also provide so many interesting insights, and it's much more interesting, I think, to learn from divergences at times, from contrasts as opposed to similarities. So I think it's really important to look at our history, where we're coming from, how we are different, how we may be unique, but how we may be very similar, and how our experiences are in many ways connected across transnational networks of politics and social change. So, what I want to actually encourage my viewers to do is to try and move away as much as possible from the current cynicism that we are constantly bombarded with, and to just take a step back and um, think through constitutions in a more historical framework. Now, it's easier said than done, but at the same time, short circuiting history has not really helped anyone. And what I want to do is really to spark your interest by suggesting to you that if you put Pakistan's example in a broader framework, not just within, let's say, South Asia, but broadly the global South, you will realize that there is much to learn from what is happening around us. Now, oftentimes, when we are commenting or analyzing the Constitution, when we are, trying to make sense of constitutional change, we oftentimes are so focused on what is happening in our local context, we forget that we are all globally connected and things in other parts of the world have some really uncanny repercussions here locally as well. So it's important to understand this broader context. Where do we start? I think one really interesting thing that younger people, and particularly university students and law students, can be very, very curious about when studying constitutions in Pakistan is to just look at the sheer diversity of the types of constitutions we've had. Now, you might think that this is nothing to be proud of, and certainly I'm not making that argument. What I'm saying is, if we try and look at these things a little more analytically, we will find that it's only through knowing our history that we can then actually begin to grasp and understand the point where we are at today. Making sense of what is happening today is invariably linked to what has happened in the past. And oftentimes you will find that what you think is unprecedented is really not. So think of Pakistan in this way. Now, when you look at scholars who are studying constitution making, Pakistan really doesn't feature as one of the contexts, you know, that scholars would want to study. But I want to suggest that it's a really fertile field for studying this particular subject. Pakistan has an example of a colonial constitution in the Government of India Act of 1935, as it was adapted by the Indian Independence Act in 1947. It has a constitution that was made in the first decade post decolonization, which was the 1956 constitution. That, of course, was abrogated, and in came a military constitution that was introduced by General Ayub Khan, who was our first military dictator. And that was followed by an interim constitution that made a transition from General Yahya Khan's martial law to a democratic government in the 1970s. And then after that came in our enduring 1973 constitution. So Pakistan itself has so many interesting experiences with constitution making, some, of course, more successful than others. Uh, but really, this is a fertile field because think about it. Every thematic category of constitution making in Pakistan today is a burgeoning field in itself, um, on how constitutions are made, how they come about, what are the kinds of social, historical, political transformations that lead to constitutions. So if you look at this, it's a really fertile case study to think about constitution. Um, and like I said, all these are really important themes. You know, what is a colonial constitution, and how does it impact the post-colony? What is what do constitutions that were made in the decolonization era, what do they stand for? What is the role of the state and citizen across contexts, right? What impact does that have on the daily lives of people? Then comes in military constitutionalism. Today, there are several contexts that are dealing with military constitutionalism. So you don't want to just stop with Pakistan's case study. You want to look across and think about military constitutionalism in broader terms. So what does Pakistan's example add to that broader conversation that is being had actually at the global level today? And then, of course, how are constitutions or democratic constitutions made within authoritarian post colonial contexts? So, Pakistan's 1973 constitution is a great illustration of how that process actually unfolds, and it may be very surprising to a lot of you, and certainly to most young people today, that I would say isn't a single piece of scholarship on how the 1973 Constitution came to be made. And right now, I'm not talking about the assembly or the assembly debates, even though it may be shocking to you that we don't even have any scholarship on the 73 debates in the assembly. But keeping that aside, we're not talking right now about the assembly debates. We're not talking right now about the text of the Constitution and its influences. We are talking about the larger social and political transformations that led into the making of the 73 Constitution, um, that make it democratic by any definition of the word. So I'm talking about the radical social movement politics of the late 60s that brought down General Ayub Khan's regime. I'm talking about Pakistan's first general election of 1970. And then, of course, Pakistan also sees a really massive upheaval in the breakup of the country in 1971. All of these really massive social and political transformations go into the making of the 73 Constitution. So you cannot divorce all these events and historical trajectories from the assembly that made that Constitution. You cannot divorce people's demands, social demands that actually went into the making of that Constitution from an analysis of what that Constitution and the consensus that was reached in 73 stands for. So, all of these things are singularly important, and yet we really don't have any literature and any scholarship to speak of. So, how are we supposed to understand the constitutional predicament that we find ourselves in today? Of course, we have Hamid Khan's Constitutional History of Pakistan, which stands as one perhaps exceptional piece of work, but that too looks at constitution making in a kind of a chronological, legalistic sort of a framework, not in a more sort of social and historical transformation framework. And that is how we need to understand our constitution today. And we simply cannot, unless we know our history, which we absolutely don't, if you ask me. So I think that this is an absolutely essential exercise. It's not just an exercise for historians or scholars, it's an exercise for all of us as a collective to think about what the Constitution means to us today, how it matters, and how we can revive a very different vision and understanding of it when we actually go back to the historical origins. I hope you've enjoyed today's opening episode, and I look forward to bringing you more in the coming days and weeks. Thank you.